Poptropica is a children's virtual world from the mid-2000s that, among countless other virtual worlds of the time, managed to stand out from the crowd and rise to quick success. Or it was a virtual world. Or it still is? Honestly, it kind of both currently exists and doesn't exist at the same time, depending on how you look at it. Poptropica was officially launched in September of 2007, making it yet another item to add to my list of reasons why 2007 was an iconic year in pop culture. Created as the brainchild of Diary of a Wimpy Kid author Jeff Kinney, Poptropica is a clear mix of all of Kinney's creative strengths: comic-like illustrations, witty dialogue, and most of all, engaging storytelling. But unlike the Wimpy Kid series, which is still going strong and on its 19th book, Poptropica is now more or less a shell of its former glory. So what went wrong? The best way to understand the game's eventual downfall is by taking a look at its entire history, which started with relatively humble beginnings. In the late 2000s, when social media was just starting to take shape and wasn't as widely used as it is today, word of mouth was still a pretty common way to learn new information, especially among kids who just wanted to yap to each other all day at school. When thinking back on it, I initially thought that Poptropica grew this way too. I couldn't remember ever seeing an ad for it on TV or something, and figured that I'd probably just heard about it through a friend at school. But it wasn't that Poptropica wasn't being promoted. It just didn't need to spend money on traditional advertising when it could push ads in a place that kids already visited all the time, even during school hours. Funbrain. Funbrain.com is an educational website created by Pearson, a textbook publisher. I don't know how popular it is today, but when I was in elementary school, I think I visited this site almost every time I was in the computer lab. It's full of different learning activities centered around subjects like math and reading, and there were also a few areas that weren't as learning-based, but still counted as doing something educational because the website had brain in the name. The playground area, and especially the arcade on Funbrain, are where I spent a lot of time as an elementary schooler, which, aside from having some pretty memorable games on their own, also happened to be the places where a new, different kind of game was advertised circa 2007. The Funbrain website nowadays looks pretty boring and unassuming, yet another victim of needlessly bland modern minimalism, but this current site isn't just missing the fun and colorful layout of the 2000s, but also the fun and colorful ads, directing you to play Poptropica as you clicked around on the other games. Clicking on any of these ads would redirect you to a separate host site to play, and let me tell you, people did click on them. If the cool adventures and cartoon characters shown in the ads weren't already enough to draw you in, the FOMO of being the only kid in class not playing Poptropica when you were supposed to be playing math games was usually enough to make anyone submit to peer pressure, myself included. And then you were in. Making a character, shuffling their features, and randomizing a silly adjective plus noun username until you found one that fit just right, forgetting all about learning on boring old Funbrain because you were too busy jumping into the game. Literally. As soon as you start playing, your avatar is running, jumping, and backflipping around before you even need to focus on the story. Half the fun as a kid was being able to zoom around with your little guy just by pointing your mouse in a direction, exploring the areas and challenging your friends to see who could climb to the top of different buildings or bounce the highest on the clotheslines. But while doing backflips off the top of skyscrapers just to see what would happen when you fell to the bottom, spoiler, the answer was nothing. Lame. Was entertaining on its own. The real gameplay revolved around Poptropica's islands. Jeff Kinney's initial concept for the site was to have an avatar-driven game where you can travel and collect things to bring back to an apartment. Though the apartment element was scrapped, the idea of carrying around all of the items from your adventures stuck. Instead of having a home base or even a central overworld, Poptropica's map was divided into a bunch of individual mini-worlds called islands that you visited via a blimp-shaped hot air balloon. Hot blimp balloon. Each island is complete with its own theme and environment that create an interactive adventure. where you can continue to needlessly flip around all over the place in new areas, but also uncover a story as you go. By clicking around the world and talking with NPCs, each island would reveal pieces of some kind of mystery or problem to solve, taking your avatar on a quest of collecting items, completing puzzles and minigames, and unlocking secrets. Around Poptropica, there were no traditional stores to buy items and clothing in. Instead, everything you wore or used was collected on different islands. The Costumizer feature let you copy almost any hair, accessory, or piece of clothing from NPCs that you encountered, and items added to your inventory to progress the story, like clues or tools, also sometimes doubled as wearable items or interactive accessories. By the end of the journey, once the story was completed and the day was saved, you've got a shiny new medal to mark your achievement, an inventory full of sweet loot, and probably some random special outfit, all to remember your adventure by. In the beginning, playing through these islands was the only real goal of the game, if you didn't count collecting items and costumes, or endlessly bouncing on power lines. Exploring and running around was still half the fun, which might sound a little simplistic now, but you really just had to be there. There was nothing quite like climbing up the giant comb on Spy Island to spray the giant hairspray at the top, discovering the giant guarding the cloud shelf in early Poptropica, or finding the secret ingredient for the coconut knockout potion to feed to the shark on Sharktooth. Not to mention the puns, silly jokes, and other absurdist or lol-xd random-based humor that was thrown into the mix to really round out the balance between skill-based action and good old-fashioned cartoony fun. In other virtual worlds that were popular at the time, the experience wasn't quite as varied and was often more predictable or similar between different games. Sites like Webkinz or Club Penguin had a central theme: penguins waddling around Penguin World, or pets wandering around Pet World, to put it in simple terms. You dress your characters, decorate their houses, talk to some other players, play mini-games in between, and that was pretty much it. Don't get me wrong, I still love both Webkinz and Club Penguin, but it was rare that they offered something new and out of the box, or features that deviated from the regular routine of sandbox play, where you more or less make up your own fun. Poptropica on the surface may not seem all that different. It's a person wandering around person world. There is also, of course, still an option to dress up your character, plenty of roleplay opportunities, and there was even a dedicated multiplayer area in each island where you could chat with other players, do epic emotes, and play competitive minigames. But when it came to your Poptropica avatar, the main character that navigated weird worlds on wacky adventures, there was more to the gameplay beyond the typical free play style of other sites. You weren't just a pet or penguin that was only dressed up like something else, even if RPing as a waiter in the pizza parlor was peak entertainment in 2008. In Poptropica, you could dress like a superhero, take action as the star of the story, and be the superhero. And once you were done with that, with pieces of your adventure collected as proof of your journey, you could move on to the next story and be anything else that the other islands had to offer. Though the premise of playing an island, completing the story, and moving on to the next might seem a little repetitive, no two islands were ever exactly the same. Most of the stories revolved around some type of mystery, fantasy, or action adventure. Superheroes, pirates, ninjas, zombies, cowboys, you know, classic stuff that kids always go crazy for. And it wasn't just the theme and the scenery that changed. The items, interactions, and outfits were all different in each island too. Instead of a copy and pasted adventure with the same old mechanics under a different coat of paint, you could be flying a jetpack on one island and lassoing outlaws on the next. As far as Poptropica's in-universe logic went, there weren't really any overarching rules, except for how to move and interact with the world, leaving each island to make up its own logic and lead you in unexpected directions with every adventure. And if you didn't like a certain island and its theme, that was fine too, because you could skip over any island without consequence, start a story and abandon it later, or play the same story over and over again if you wanted, which everyone did, because everyone had a favorite. One of my personal favorites to revisit was Spy Island, because duh, spy stuff was so cool as a kid, and it still is. I always felt that they really nailed the realistically impractical yet super cool in theory secrecy and gadgetry of it all, with a spy code, grappling hook bow tie, invisibility suit, and manila folders. I love manila folders. I also remember feeling really accomplished and smart for completing the story and saving the day, because not every island was a walk in the park to beat. I think this replayability, both in old and new islands, is one of the main reasons why Poptropica became so popular so quickly. It wasn't just one game, it was like a bunch of smaller games all wrapped up into one. The novelty is what initially seemed to draw players in, and after that, the unpredictable nature of what island might come next, being surprised by new characters, creative puzzles, and wacky worlds, is what kept kids coming back. And new islands dropping was always a big deal. When the game launched, there was only one single island, which I remember playing through and then wondering what I was supposed to do next. Safe to say, all the new players coming in on the daily from the seemingly very successful Funbrain ads pretty quickly showed that there was a big demand for more islands. Within a little over a year, in late 2008, there were a total of 7 islands that were part of the map with a range of different themes, including early classics that I remember loving like Sharktooth, Time Tangled, 24 Karat, and Superpower. Among these early islands was also the first island sponsored by a third party, Nabuti Island. This map was based on the book The Lost Jewels of Nabuti from the Choose Your Own Adventure series, and included an area that advertised the books and would redirect you to the series website if you clicked on them. The rest of the island, though, while it did follow the adventure from the book, was generally pretty low-key in advertising the series. After Nabuti, the next island release was Big Nate, which had a slightly stronger approach in advertising, to say the least. Big Nate is a comic strip and book series, and on Big Nate Island, the entire map was hand-drawn by the comic artist himself, recreating areas from the series with cameos from the characters. This island also had an advertisement area with links to some of the Big Nate books and sets of different comics to read through for free. When I played this when I was younger, I remember wondering why it looked different than the rest of Poptropica, given the very blatant area that was advertising, or explaining, the theme behind the island. I'm sure I got the gist that this was based on another brand, but I still didn't get why it had to look different. Where are all my fellow Poptropicans? The classic clotheslines? My brand! Maybe I was just a bad candidate for targeted advertising because I didn't care about reading comics or who these random characters were. I just wanted to play the regular game. That being said though, even without clicking on the links, the whole area itself was still one giant advertisement for the series, so I guess it got the job done, even if I remained mostly unaffected. Given Jeff Kinney's background in writing and illustrating in a comic-esque style himself, publishing children's books of his own, and considering Poptropica is an extension of Pearson, an education-based company, the addition of islands based on book series makes sense. While Poptropica isn't overly educational in a traditional sense, it still promotes reading comprehension, problem-solving skills, and critical thinking, which are all great learning tools for its younger audience. Introducing sponsorships into any kid-focused media will always ruffle a few feathers, especially when the site started off as mostly ad-free, but sponsors that at least encourage reading, promote further educational content, and align with the creator's views have to count for something. Within the next year, though, Poptropica began to step their ad game up, and it wasn't just about promoting reading anymore. In between game areas, there were often these little blank segments that were made just to travel through to get to the next space, which is where I first remember seeing ads in the game. They were big and unavoidable, sure, but I thought of them almost like billboards, easy to ignore and just continue on my way. But when the ads started to break out of these dedicated spaces and were placed right in the middle of the main game areas of certain islands, they were definitely harder to tune out. These ads were sometimes still simple panels, but were also sometimes entire themed buildings, usually placed between or around other areas that you visited to progress the game. And these promotional buildings weren't just for show. They could be entered to get even more ad, usually including a themed interior, special NPC or mascot, and for some sponsors, branded minigames. If there were other kids that were anything like me and for the most part skipped over the clickable links in favor of playing the regular game, these new and improved ad spaces seemed to target that exact problem by making the areas not just bigger and impossible to miss, but also enticing and fun by including a playable experience centered around a sponsor, and often with the reward of an in-game item for completing the game. While playing through islands was the main draw of Poptropica, the second most appealing element was definitely collecting items from playing, especially items that were wearable or were otherwise interactive in some way. The prizes for completing branded minigames were typically temporary and themed around the sponsor, but they were usually the coolest kind of items, not just cosmetics, but things like visual effects and special abilities. And all you had to do to get them was play through an advertisement and then carry a card around with a link to the advertiser's website on your Poptropican avatar at all times. It's so easy! The temptation to play in these sponsored areas was clearly a lot stronger than just clicking on a boring old ad for a book. Blech. I mean, can a lame book get you a Cinnamon Toast Crunch branded adventure outfit after collecting all of the Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal pieces in the Cinnamon Toast Jump branded minigame? Yeah, I didn't think so. The sponsors were always kid-centric brands promoting things like toys, snacks, and media, and there were some pretty big names involved. Barbie, Lego, Kellogg's, Disney, and by 2009, there was an entire team of Poptropica employees dedicated just to creating ad experiences. As much as heavily advertising to children, with the additional incentive to click by offering free stuff, does have some negative connotations, I have to say that at the same time, I'm kinda glad that Poptropica did it. Not in defense of these practices, or for any reasons relating to the actual game, but because a lot of these old Poptropica gameplay videos that were posted in the late 2000s act like a sort of online archive of pop culture and kids media during this era. I mean, this video where Mario Dude 25 runs around Poptropica past an ad for Yogos while Year 3000 by the Jonas Brothers plays in the background is a near perfect snapshot of 2008 and one of the most me-core videos I've ever seen. I love the internet. I'm so glad this exists. And I'd also forgotten about half of this stuff too. I mean, I don't think I'd have ever remembered that Mr. Popper's Penguins existed on my own, or that Open Season got not just one, but 2 sequels, unless I'd had Secret Penguin to remind me, so that's kinda cool. Not to mention that even unrelated to Poptropica, I also love these old videos because in an era before clout and Riz and monetization on YouTube, kids would usually post stuff just because they could, and all these uploads are evidence of them having fun with free reign on the internet, unregistered Hypercam 2, and a dream. Like Fashion Face Off that has 4 to 5 different songs chaotically layered in the background. This walkthrough that opens with "please subscribe," or this slideshow of random low-res pics, complete with Windows Movie Maker effects and slides of Miley Cyrus and Demi Lovato. Maybe it doesn't make sense to you, but I see the vision. This is exactly what the inside of my brain looked like when I was 9. Anyway, nostalgic tangent aside, the main point is that pretty early on into its lifespan, Poptropica was really going all in with integrating brand deals. The path to monetization was set, and it didn't stop at just the ads. In May of 2009, the Poptropica store was introduced as a place where players could buy in-game items using a premium currency called credits. The items were almost entirely cosmetic, like clothing and accessories, ranging from regular outfits and hair to crazy costumes and effects. Between 100 and 150 credits could be earned for free by completing an island and by logging in regularly to claim daily rewards. Or credits could be bought with real money, aka mommy and daddy's credit card. As someone who played tons of virtual worlds as a kid and also had to ask for said credit card for various memberships, I appreciate that Poptropica offered a decent way of earning credits just by playing the game. Not everyone has the means, and not every guardian has the patience to keep paying various fees for random kids' games. Shout out to Jelly Mom, who watches all my videos. Thanks for buying me memberships as a kid. I promise it was money well spent. That being said though, while the gesture is generous on the surface, offering free currency is also a common tactic to give kids just a little taste to incentivize purchasing more credits, so I guess take it with a grain of salt. Less than a year after the store was introduced, another feature launched that went hand in hand with the store: Poptropica Membership, a subscription that initially eliminated the need for credits at all. As long as a membership was active, every item on the store could be used freely, including new items that were marked especially for members only. Members also got early access to islands, could play new bonus quests, and play on older existing islands that were now locked for non-members. I didn't play Poptropica all that much past around 2009 or so, but I remember when I did visit it after what seemed like just a short break, I found all of these new features to be very overwhelming. Sure, the core gameplay was still the same, but the credits and rewards and store items were definitely a big change from the site that I was used to, especially compared to that fateful day when I first clicked off of Funbrain in 2007 and could only play a single island. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing that all of these new monetary options were being pumped out. Again, I definitely played my fair share of games that also had paid options and bought them. Or had my mom buy them. It's not like Poptropica was the only kids website to feature both ads and premium content, and there's generally nothing wrong with getting that bag. But I will say that it certainly did seem to go all in on monetization very quickly, and from this point forward, the brand was kind of a blur of new features and content, so let's just speedrun the next few years. 2011, physical merch was introduced, including but not limited to shirts, figures, plushes, iPod skins, music, books, Hardee's Kids Meal toys, $90 shoes printed with Dr. Beeve, and a Nintendo DS game. 2012, Poptropica Friends, a profile and friending system rolled out, and 10 new islands dropped, the most released in a single year. 2013, a spin-off game mobile app released. 2014, the 3DS port of the mobile spin-off and the official Poptropica app of the main game were released. 2015, Poptropica Realms, a sandbox-style game mode, was added, and 2016, Pearson began selling Poptropica English, a language learning program for schools and teachers, which is some of the most interesting branded content I've personally ever encountered. I think that covers everything for a little while. And don't forget that along the way, regular islands, store content, and merch were still being regularly produced in the meantime. My goal in skimming past all of these updates and changes is not to just point and say, hey look, too many products, money bad, but to really highlight how not just big Poptropica had become, but how much it was changing for the sake of modernization. Every virtual world goes through changes throughout its lifespan, especially any games that advanced through the same time period as Poptropica. While all of these business ventures are the natural progression of a successful brand, and again, there's nothing wrong with getting that bag, I still think it's worth noting how much this continuous push for monetization affected the overall vibe of the game. I mean, sure, you could still run around playing all the same islands as the old site, if you were a member, that is. And the only real difference, besides the constant ads, was that there were now more costumes and premium content, which were all optional anyway. Surely none of this could affect the game when it mostly boils down to just a few visual changes, right? Well, I guess. The core gameplay is still there, but gameplay is arguably only part of what makes the entire experience, with avatars and world building often being just as important. Thinking back to Jeff Kinney's initial idea, the original vision for Poptropica was to keep the player's character as the main focus, intentionally not giving them a house or overworld, and bringing all of their items that they earn with them wherever they go.
And so we took that central mechanic of the game is that your character doesn't actually have a home. Your character travels and brings everything with them. And that's very liberating because then you don't have a geographic challenge. You know, if you had to keep going back to your house or apartment, you would be limited in a way as far as how far afield you could go.
Before the store was introduced, the only way to get new items was by completing islands and using the costumizer, making your avatar not just a playable character, but an extension of the core gameplay and representation of all your wacky adventures with wearable trophies. And this is part of what I always found exciting about entering the multiplayer areas, in any game really. Being able to show off what you've earned and how cool your little guy was. Sure, I think we all backflip, but being able to dress up like an 1800s Western lady with a hard hat, grass skirt, and grappling hook bow tie was an exclusive right of players who had matched your point of progression. The addition of the store turned customization from something earnable into something buyable, whether you could buy specific island rewards or not. What's the value of an island's exclusive prizes compared to items from the store that are, in a way, even more exclusive and usually more exciting and flashy? Is the incentive to complete islands for certain rewards affected at all when it's easier to just buy something cooler for less effort instead? In 2014, Jeff Kinney also explained that Poptropica had recently switched to a new content model, where instead of new 2-hour islands being released every 3 months, 20-minute episodic islands would be released every 2 weeks. This was partially in response to an increase of players on the new mobile app, and seemingly to balance out resources between creating new islands and premium features. So now, new islands were shorter, older islands were locked behind a paywall, cosmetics were vast and buyable, and sponsors, membership, merch, and credits were advertised at every turn. Which brings me back to my point. It's still the same game, but changes to the avatars, maps, and gameplay give the overall environment a completely different feel. Let me make it clear that I don't think any of these additions are inherently bad. I love to personalize stuff, and having more options for customization, even if they're paid options, is great. Premium content helps keep the lights on and the site functioning. Having a larger amount and variety of features is also generally a good thing, especially given the dedication to keeping the site fresh and creating content quickly. But at the same time, it's also true that in my experience, when any game tries to become a one-stop shop, it tends to start to lose sight of what appealed to players in the first place. At best, the modern version of Poptropica is an experience bloated by features and monetization, and at worst, prioritizing quantity over quality, with the original novelty of the game taking a back seat to potential revenue. All that being said, despite the game clearly having a more commercialized feel as it continued to grow, Poptropica still remained pretty popular, even past the initial golden age of virtual worlds and into the late 2010s. In 2015, the game had over 3.2 million unique monthly users in 200 countries and territories, which is no small feat. It was also in 2015 that the game was sold from Pearson's Family Education Network to Sandbox Partners. Under direction from these new owners, modernization continued into 2017 with the release of Poptropica Worlds, another spin-off that ran alongside the original on a separate site. Advertised as the next generation of the game, Worlds functioned pretty much exactly like the original, but with modernized graphics, including more detailed game areas and a redesigned avatar that gave Poptropicans real hands and feet. There were also some general quality of life changes, like new dialogue boxes and a different movement system. One new Worlds Island was included at launch, and a remaster of the existing 24-carat island released a couple months later, even including a bonus mini-island. But then, the next island didn't come until 7 months later in 2018. And after that, there were no more updates made to the game, ever. It definitely seems like Worlds was intended to be a Poptropica 2.0 that all the original players would eventually migrate over to. but based on just a few comments that are floating around, I think it's safe to say that it didn't hit the way they thought it would. Looking at a few gameplay videos and the official trailers, I can kind of see what they were going for. But modern does not always equal better, especially when the new modern thing is something no one really asked for. I mean, maybe some players had been asking for more realistic hands and feet for years, or remastered versions of older islands, but making an entirely new game instead of updating the original was not the right move. After poor reception, Worlds remained running and playable after the 2018 Island update, but was otherwise slowly and quietly abandoned with no official announcement. Meanwhile, in the real Poptropica though, things were still going great. Or at least as great as things can be in a dying virtual world in the late 2010s. It's a Poptropica party! We've got updated profile pages, cool emotes, and an all-new decoratable clubhouse, which definitely does not go against the original concept of the game.
Is that your character doesn't actually have a home. Your character travels and brings everything with them.
And also definitely not just a feature that was ported over from Poptropica Worlds? I don't know what that is. I'm pretty sure there's only ever been one kind of Poptropica. Worlds seem to have been a pretty big resource sink for the brand, if the lack of islands and updates in the original game at the time were anything to go by. But conveniently, in 2018, after everyone started pretending Worlds never existed, focus seemed to shift back to the original, starting with the removal of 29 original islands from the game. Poptropica creators claimed that this huge change was due to their older islands being made with an earlier version of Adobe Flash, and that the removed maps would eventually be brought back once the game was updated. And in 2020, when Adobe Flash Player was infamously discontinued, RIP to a real one, a hacks port of Poptropica was released and updated, although slowly, to include original features over time. So the hope was that all islands would eventually be playable again in time. Poptropica Worlds, though, was not updated by the team in 2020, or archived by players, or even mentioned at all. Around the time that Flash died, it's basically lost media now, which the devs are probably happy about. Speaking of Poptropican ventures that were poorly received or destined to become lost media, 2022 was a year for more new projects that were both ambitious and, unfortunately, total failures. While the original game's hacks port was still in progress years later, and the old removed islands were still unplayable, Poptropica turned to Roblox? 2 Roblox maps, or games, or whatever, I don't know how Roblox works, were published by Pop creators in the beginning of the year. They were fully rendered in 3D, at least one was based on a popular island, promoted on official socials, and saw a collective total of about 12k visits since 2022. I understand the intention of trying to introduce Poptropica to a younger audience, but this seems like a weird way to do it. The one map that's based on the original game's Zomberry Island provides no context for its included lore and characters for new players, and there's no mention of the actual word Poptropica anywhere in its information for existing players to find the game. And the other map, Unicorn Frenzy, did have Poptropica branding in its thumbnail, but otherwise has no real relation and is just a very generic collection type of game, which I'm sure is an already very oversaturated genre on Roblox, and so got even less traffic than the other game. I guess the unicorns didn't really help. A little later into 2022, Poptropica Junior was launched, another spin-off aimed towards a younger audience of preschool and early elementary players. Unlike the original, Poptropica Junior wasn't a single game, but a website with a variety of things to do, similar to Funbrain. It even included some activities from Funbrain, along with minigames and other activities featuring Poptropica characters. As an early learning website, I'm sure this idea was pretty much fine, but again, as a way to introduce the game to a younger audience, maybe with the hope that this will lead them to play the original when they're older or something, I'm not really seeing the vision. And I guess no one else saw it either. Although it was promoted on official socials, including an account made especially for the new site, Poptropica Jr. just didn't last. It ran at least until May 2024 before the site itself was shut down. While the Roblox games and pre-K site were clearly targeting a young new potential audience, and while the main site only saw one island release in 2022, existing players weren't completely forgotten about, as in 2022, Poptropica also released for the first time on Steam. For a price of $20, 17 original islands were included to play, along with other features like costumes, clubhouses, multiplayer common rooms, and Realms, the sandbox creator. And this was received about as well as the rest of the 2022 projects were. Maybe you'll remember that 2 years earlier, a large number of islands were removed from the online site, with a promise to eventually be updated and re-released at a later point. While the Hacks port was still in progress and these old islands had yet to make a reappearance, fans were hopeful that the Steam release would finally come with the option to replay some of their favorite older islands that had been removed. While most of the promotional posts for the Steam port were clear about the amount of islands that would be included, they were pretty vague about which ones specifically were making a comeback. Hints about which islands were included were dropped leading up to the release, but aside from the game's Steam store page, the actual names of the islands were never outright posted. To be fair, the hints weren't all that secretive and were usually solved pretty easily, but the lack of straightforward island announcements on socials seemed to lead to a lot of speculation. The hype from fans that had been waiting to play older maps for years at this point was building, which made the eventual disappointment hit that much harder. Most of the reviews for the game, both negative and positive, mentioned that they had hoped for older classic islands to be included, more islands in general, or that the $20 price tag just didn't seem worth it, considering the lack of islands. I don't know if I'd say that Poptropica was being intentionally shady about not making larger announcements about the included islands outside of the hints and the store page, but there was a clear negative response once players were able to finally buy the game and discover what was included, or what wasn't included, for themselves. Initially, Poptropica implied that it would update the Steam version at some point, even going as far as to ask on Twitter which old islands fans most wanted to see included. But that seemed to be yet another empty, or at least slow-moving promise, as the last Steam update was in 2023 and just for bug fixes. As for the main game in 2023, there was similar radio silence. A year of little to no new content, unless you count all of the lay funny memes they were regularly posting to their socials, encouraging people to play a game that wasn't being updated. In December 2023, rumors began circulating that Poptropica was shutting down at the end of the year, which led to tons of sad reactions from fans, both nostalgic and current. But in the same month, the Poptropica creators debunked the rumor. But then within just a couple months of the initial shutdown hoax, Poptropica announced that the original site would be taken down, with the game migrating over to Cool Math Games, another educational website. While this was a pretty direct indication that this was officially the end, the final nail in the coffin came later in 2023. An announcement from a former employee confirmed that Poptropica as a company had been shut down, along with Suit Up Games, a sister company dedicated to creating Roblox games, which explains the other Roblox games from the year before.
Hello?
For the last year, Cool Math has continued to host the remnants of Poptropica, still playable and somewhat preserved, but lacking islands and features, including those islands that never got put back into the game, and no longer being maintained or updated with new content. Fortunately, almost every island is still playable in the archived version of the game for free on Flashpoint, including plenty of islands and features that aren't available on the Cool Math site or in the Steam version of the game. 2022 definitely seemed like Poptropica's last-ditch effort to revive the game, or at least scrape together some last-minute revenue. But all of those efforts were being made from a ship that was already sinking. I do sympathize with Poptropica being over 15 years old by that point, and the creators struggling to keep the business afloat when it used to have millions of regular players and huge sponsors. But unfortunately, those desperate attempts didn't work, and more than anything, left existing fans that were still playing without many updates to the original site and wondering about the future of the game. Funneling what little resources the company still had at the time into things like Roblox and Steam releases was a pretty disappointing way to go out, both for the game itself and for players that were still holding on. Although the last few years of Poptropica's official lifespan were definitely different compared to its peak in the early 2010s, there are still some comparisons that can be drawn between the two eras. And, ironically enough, examples of its flaws over the years are best illustrated in one of Poptropica's own islands, Mocktropica. This island from 2013 is designed as a parody of what the game would be like under unideal and money-hungry management, filling the map with glitches, out-of-touch employees, laid-off creators, unfinished projects, and obnoxious ads. Sound familiar? Again, the golden age of the game compared to its downward spiral in later years are different, mainly in that they were motivated by different things. The 2010s were all about making the most of the increase in popularity, where the later years were focused on desperately trying to get some of that popularity back. But in both cases, the overall critique boils down to prioritizing revenue over players. Would listening to players have made Poptropica live forever, or change much about how its eventual downfall did play out? Did Poptropica players even know what they wanted, let alone what would actually make the game better? The answer to all of these is probably not. But I still believe that a little additional integrity when it came to monetization, and transparency when it came to keeping fans in the loop towards the end would have gone a long way for its image. At the end of the day, hardcore fans are the main reason that these games and companies survived so long to begin with, and didn't die out completely after the initial craze had come and gone. Even though I didn't personally play Poptropica much past its initial few years, and even though it's in a pretty well-preserved state right now between the honorable efforts of Cool Math and Flashpoint, its story still makes me sad. Maybe the end was always inevitable, like was also the case with most other nostalgic games just like it, but its rocky state over the last few years didn't have to be. Despite the eventual downfall and the unfortunate spiral that led to it, I still believe that Poptropica had a great run overall. Jess Brallier, a former publisher of Poptropica, summed up the original vision of the game as
simple, that we would create a virtual world in which to tell stories. So we're not doing a virtual world to create a social networking opportunity, not to house games, not to host a virtual economy, but to tell stories.
Although its focus of storytelling definitely shifted over the years, I think that in the time that it had, Poptropica did tell original stories with humor, creativity, and a clearly passionate team, giving millions of players an experience that they'll look back on fondly, no matter how it ended. Hi, welcome to JellyTV, where I shout out a video that I think deserves some love. I recommend watching The Bratz Goth Phase Exploring Bratzillas by Ginza Bear. If you've ever wondered, what if the Bratz dolls were turned into goth witches? Then Ginza Bear is here to give you all the info on the doll line that did exactly that. The doll world is so fascinating to me because of how much unexpected nuance goes into every doll line and every design choice, and Ginza Bear covers all of these details super well. You can tell that she's really passionate about the subject, plus her editing and outfits are so cute. If you're into doll collecting or just like girly nostalgia in general, then you should give this video a watch. A huge thank you to Daniel E. from ABQ, Kevin Evans, Bunny, Bunzo, Karis Desarun, Chumby, Hayden Campbell, India W, Lojba Animal, Lou, Luna Stephenson, Mark Kent, Nighttime Coral, Ollie E, Paper Sam, Pharmamags, Pixel Puppy, Shaples, Theodore Nicoloilius, Vivian Valencia, and the rest of my patrons for supporting me. I randomly generated a username on Poptropica for each of you. Hopefully it fits you and you like it, because it's your new government name now. Sorry, no take backsies.